Example, I had two teachers on my staff that were from New York City, and there's a very different culture that they came from on how they do things. I lived in Oregon all my life until 4 years ago. West Coast culture is different than East Coast, Northern Virginia culture. Fortunately, I had experience in the South because of my mother, but I can remember as a youngster going down into Arkansas and thinking, this is different. This is not like where I was from. Any other stories on that?
We talked about comparing our backgrounds, and I told her I grew up in the inner city, and she grew up in, the rural area, but our backgrounds were similar in terms of ending up in single-parent homes, and I was sharing with her that I could relate to my kids whom I teach, mostly inner city kids, and understand some of the things that they go through because that was once me as I grew up. And she said, well, I could too, because even though I didn't grow up in the inner city, but I shared some of the same commonalities. Single parent homes, lower socioeconomic background, all of those things played in the same environment that I had in inner city, which both helped both of us to relate to the children, so culturally speaking.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I've got more things to cover, but this is a great conversation starter for a staff or for a team to start thinking about how you're building relationships within, the kids and the adults, and to share, what is your background and how does that impact how we're working together. It's a really good way to get to know colleagues and to build those relationships, as well as to think through how it impacts how you deal with kids and why you get upset with some things and other things don't, and your colleague is going, why do you just let that slide, and it's driving them crazy. We're all different. Stephen Covey talks about the 7 habits, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about relationships like a bank. And you go to the bank and you put money in the bank so that the next time you go to the bank you need to withdraw money, you've got money deposited. It doesn't work well when you go to the bank and want to withdraw money and you have nothing in the account. They get cranky over that. If you write a check and there's nothing in there for them to pull out from. Think about the relationships you build and the kinds of things that you can do in order to build those relationships. It's putting money in the bank. I had an experience as an assistant principal, the way our offices were set up. It came out from the hall. People would come in and they could look into my office. There were 2 other offices in the area and then a little reception waiting area. And a mother came through the door of the outer office from the hall into our area, and she could see me in my office, and she started screaming. She was angry with me. I had done something to her child, and how dare I treat him this way, and if I'd known about this wouldn't have happened. And she was shouting. There was a student sitting in the reception area over there whose eyes were getting really big listening to all this. He was one of my frequent flyers. He had like premier executive, 1,000K mile status, the highest, whatever the airline has, sky miles wise. He was in my office a lot. He had numerous behavior problems, and we'd had lots of consequences. We'd had parent conferences, we'd had detentions, we'd had suspensions, and he was down there for a timeout at that time. You all recognize the type of child. And I'm thinking, oh boy, he's probably enjoying this. The counselor who had one of the other offices went and got him and took him out because this lady, even if I shut the door of my office, was screaming, and I didn't really want to shut the office door with somebody screaming in there. I'd rather there be other adults around. And we got her settled down, and we got through that, and everything went on. And later the counselor came to me and she goes, do you know what Scott said when I took him out? And I'm thinking he's probably going, okay, Mrs. Kinney's getting beaten out by a parent. And he said, as soon as they walked out of the office, he looked at me and he said, I know that lady doesn't know what she's talking about. Because that's not the way Mrs. Kinney would treat kids. I know how she treats them, and that's not it. I made deposits with him, even though I had withdrawn, because we often have to make withdrawals. But if you have a deposit in there, the withdrawal is much easier. if you have the relationship. It works the same with adults. As an assistant principal, my principal once directed me to write a letter of reprimand for a teacher in the building who happened to be the chair of the district grievance committee. We had a pretty strong union association at that particular time. And she had stepped out of line. She had done something she shouldn't have done. She knew she shouldn't have done it. And we were kind of working through it, but all of a sudden I had to write the letter of reprimand that was going into her permanent file. And yet, I could keep a relationship with her, even though I had to do that later on when I was principal, she was the one I went to when there was an issue that was coming up that I could see grievance, I could see union problems written all over it. I would go into her room and I'd say, can we take our hats off? She'd go, yeah, and we kind of take off the principal hat and take off the union hat. Okay, here's the situation. Here's what's going on. Here's how I'm thinking about dealing with it. Tell me what you think. And she and I would have those conversations and kind of come to some sort of a tentative agreement, knowing that when we put our hats back on, we may be faced in a situation where that conversation could never have taken place. But the relationship was there, even though I had made some pretty serious withdrawals from it. I obviously made enough deposits that we could do that, because it was a huge help to me as a principal. And I don't think I ever had a grievance as a principal because of that kind of preventative maintenance. Oh, whoops, before I start this. I'm going to show you a series of, I think it's 3 or maybe 4 short video clips. Rita Pearson is a consultant for Ruby Payne's organization, the Understanding a Culture of Poverty. And she shares some stories about these building relationships and making deposits and withdrawals.
In this book, she talks about relationships the way Stephen Covey defines them in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in terms of deposits and withdrawal. And one of the deposits that must be made in the relationship is kindness. Kindness is often overlooked. It's seen as a weakness. And I have discovered that I can get more people to do things that I really want them to do with kindness. I've had 250-pound linebackers say to me, Ms. Pearson, you forgot to give me a sticker on my feet. These are big, husky kids. Me saying that I was at the game last night and I saw you make that play, and boy, was I proud of you. Kindness. Sometimes when the toughest kids in a school or the toughest individuals to work with can be won over with acts of kindness. Stephen Covey sees that as a deposit. A withdrawal is being sarcastic and negative and nasty. You know, sit down in the chair. What part of sitting down don't you get? Oh, you don't have chairs in your house or what? Well, kindness works a little bit differently. I know you're walking around. Maybe you forgot that sitting is what we're doing right now. I need you to take your chair. So relationship building helps overcome so many obstacles that would be in our way otherwise. Apologizing when you're wrong. Seeing the deposit. We have the toughest time saying we're sorry. We see it as a weakness.
I'll go into that one in just a moment. Just in your head, where would you rate your school on kindness factor? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being extremely kind and 1 being, we've got a long ways to go. You know, just think about that. I'm not going to ask anybody to share that. But how do people treat each other? Do kids see adults modeling kindness to one another on how they treat people? Is there mutual respect between students and teachers?